I must warn you in advance, I'm slightly obsessed with blood vessels, which suggests some kind of vampire-like state, but let me reassure you that it's a positive thing. They're fascinating. Sorry. That was a bad start to a video, wasn't it? Anyway, let me remind you of something first of all. This is just a very simple drawing I did in advance, and I just want to remind you, if it's going to appear, there we go. Just want to remind you that in essence we've got a double loop circulatory system. So if we were just to call this a double loop, hopefully that would make sense to you, because the heart, which is here, obviously just left of the center of the chest, it's firing blood up to the lungs, it's coming back, and then it's coming through, and out it's going down to the body. We have got two loops. But those loops are made up of vessels, and those blood vessels, of course, are the vehicle by which blood cells and the plasma of the blood is transported to wherever it's needed. That is what we are as a multicellular, trillion multicellular organism. That's what we are, okay? And therefore, this sort of transport network is really important. Your blood vessels could be seen as a series of tunnels or roads or whatever you want to think about them as. And of course, therefore, they have to have certain dynamics and to perform their role. Now, with that in mind, and by the way, there are many different types of blood vessels, but I'm going to introduce you to three, and I'm just drawing these in advance. We've got an artery, we've got a vein, and a capillary. Now, funnily enough, I'm actually going to teach these to you as 1, 2, 3. And I wonder if you can think about why I'm going to do that before I do it. And I won't tell you, but I'll see if you guys can figure that out. Excuse me. Now, the first group of blood vessels we're going to think about is an artery. So first things first, I just want to depict on there a concept. This here is called a lumen. Okay, and a lumen literally is the space within the blood vessel where all the plasma and the blood cells and the red blood cells and the white blood, they're going to pass through. And just want you to notice here that on an artery, it's quite small. Okay, now it's not very small. We're going to get back to this. This one is not in scale, but the lumen of this is quite small. And that is because blood is being moved at quite a high force in arteries. Why? Because arteries, their position is on the exit from the heart. So for example, this here is the pulmonary artery. Notice it's about blood coming out of the heart. This here is the aorta. This is about blood coming out of the heart. So the first thing we want to say is that arteries, they exit the heart. Now, I've already mentioned that the blood that exits under high pressure, you should know why now, because effectively the blood's very close to the heart, the pump that's creating the force. But the other thing I want to say about these is that if you look, this here, I was just to shade it in with a different colour. This here is muscle. And what we can notice about this particular group of vessels, our arteries, is that they have thick, elastic, and I'm just going to call them walls. Okay, for now, I'm not going to get into the exact structure of these, but they have thick elastic walls. And why would that be? Well, they're muscular, they're flexible, they can sort of expand. And that is because this heart thing is a really forceful pump. And of course, our arteries are close to the heart. They're the first exit points. Therefore, they have to be elastic and strong and thick to resist that force. That is what they do. Now, let's take this journey a little bit further. Oh, and by the way, I should say before I do this, and this will become more meaningful in a second, arteries, once the blood has left the heart, do not have valves. Now, valves, their job is to prevent backflow of blood. And we're going to find later that veins do have valves, and I'll draw that for you a little bit. But I just want to carry this journey on. And what we're going to do now is we're going to imagine that our blood has now left the heart, it's come through this aorta, it's spread into different arteries, smaller ones, and it's now crossing this capillary bed. This down here is a capillary bed. Now, this is just a depiction on my drawing. It would be nowhere near that big. But capillaries, that's what I've got drawn over here as a second. So we go from arteries to capillaries, and then you probably figure out we're going to go to veins afterwards on the way back to the heart. But capillaries are amazing. First of all, this one here is massive. Not in the sense that it is in the body, but the way I've drawn it. If I was to draw it on the screen, you would definitely, it wouldn't be a single pixel. It would be tiny. Okay, tiny. So I've just drawn it. And I also want you to notice, look, that it's got like a cell there. And a cell, I can't quite see my lines, a cell there. And another cell there. Notice that in terms of thickness, my capillaries are 1 cell thick. So if I'm comparing it to a thick elastic artery, my capillaries are tiny, they're really, really thin. And that's because they have to be partially permeable. They have to allow diffusion to occur. That's their job. The other thing is that the lumen is tinsy wincy. Lumen is very small. In fact, let me put a big V, very small. In fact, folks, I can tell you the exact diameter of that capillary because I know, and you might know this from your biology, it's exactly 7 micrometers in diameter. How do we know that? We know that because if I was to draw a red blood cell here, sort of on its side, that red blood cell would also be exactly 7 micrometers. Capillaries are structured to be the exact size of red blood cells, which will just squeeze through. It's one of the things that helps with diffusion. So the lumen is spectacularly small. And also, we can also say they have no valves. So we've got no backflow valves in capillaries. But one thing I would just mention, on the entrance to capillary beds, let me just do it differently. On the entrance to capillary beds, maybe here, we do have muscle. And that muscle can sort of, it surrounds like muscle around, not inside a valve inside, but around it. They can kind of constrict and prevent blood flow or encourage it somewhere else. Now, our third type of blood vessel is a vein. And our veins, this is the word that probably people use most commonly just as blood vessels. Or blood vessels are veins. No, some of them are veins. So this is what we need to think about. Once the blood leaves the capillary bed, it enters veins. And then its journey is back to the heart. But the problem is that we've got very low pressure. We've got very low. The blood is now miles away from the heart, which is it's on its way back. Obviously, it's getting close to it. But in terms of the force that's being produced, it's not receiving much of that force. So the veins are an interesting one. First of all, they're thinner walls. And you can see that in the illustration above. But notice that the lumen, I could say the word massive again, is large. So if I was just to depict the lumen, let me just go to a colour that's going to work for me. Look at this lumen here. Really large compared to the one in the artery. Okay, so the lumen of the vein is much bigger, the opening, the space. But this is where it gets interesting with veins. They contain what we call pocket valves. Excuse me, now it's not in the depiction above, so I'm going to kind of draw it. This is so imagine that you're looking at a vein. Maybe it's this one here, it's this chunk of vein here. This vein is going up, and over here, if we were to go in that direction, the heart would be somewhere, somewhere over there. So we're trying to get to the heart, bad drawing obviously. So what we have in this vein is we have a series of valves. We have a series of valves like this. And what happens is as the blood pushes through, it can open these valves, go past them. But once there's not enough force, if this blood drops backwards, these valves will close. So it's almost like they're climbing the steps of the ladder here. They push open, they go through, but when the blood sort of maybe becomes less, when it's moving less, if it tries to drop back because of gravity or whatever, it cannot go back the other way. So those pocket valves are really important because otherwise what would happen, this blood would all just sort of end up pooling in, the legs or whatever. It's got to be pushed back out. Now, I'm not going to get into venous return and all these different structures. Then maybe that's in your A-level studies or IB studies in the future, or BTEC or whatever. But that is a nice introduction to veins and how they work. Cheers.